It was an easy call to make. It was an easy play, but it was just such a big play for the Alabama fans. I had a good call on it, and that one doesn't get mentioned all that much, but I think it should.
Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon. Welcome to Beat Everyone. I am Ben Flanagan with AL.com. I'm here with AL.com's Michael Casagrande, longtime Alabama football writer, and we're back with another edition of the Golden Age with the man himself, Eli Gold. Eli, how you doing?
I am well. Good to see you guys. How's everything?
Great.
Yeah.
It's good to have you back. And Eli, today is a celebration. We're going to look back at some of your highest highs on the air and name the Mount Rushmore of Eli Gold calls on the air.
Okay.
So what do you consider, I guess the definition here is kind of a combination of your top four calls, of your best, what you consider your most important, the calls you feel kind of define your career. Like when you think of all you did as the Alabama play-by-play announcer, the four calls that you think of when you were on the mic calling Alabama football. So when you think about that concept, what would be your criteria?
Well, the criteria is to get it right. That's, the more detail you can offer. And, that's number one. If the ball is being carried by, Trent Richardson, you don't want to say Eddie Lacy. You don't want to make a mistake. So that's number one. Make sure it's clean and clear and factually accurate. That's the number one. There have been, I'll tell you, there have been times over the course of the 36 years where I'd make a call and it was not good at all. Whether I misidentified a player, whether I screwed up, whatever. And we would obviously, as I mentioned on one of our previous episodes, I don't have a backspace key. So once I say it, it's gone. But as soon as we go to commercial, I would get with Tom Stipe. I say, Tom, that cut never needs to see the light of day again anywhere. And, so that would be, for whatever reason, whatever I did wrong, I said, please, let's bury that.
Lose the tape.
Lose the tape, or just mark it in the archives. Do not use on air again. Whatever it might be, that happens. We're all human. But no, the biggest criteria is, yes, you want it to be, if you're talking about plays for Alabama, you want them to be huge, huge plays to Devontae for the national championship, things of that nature. But the biggest thing is make sure they're accurate.
I was just thinking about this. What kind of play is the play? Like a kickoff return is a play that builds and builds and builds, as opposed to a quick strike touchdown pass. Is it? Do you like a good kickoff or a punt return?
Oh, sure. I'm like any fan. I love a big play. I loved, the kick return against the Clemson Tigers to ice that game away. There were a lot of big plays like that. That yes, you build up to a crescendo. And then the fans kick in, and you have the 100,000 behind you, and their voices are yelling and screaming, and there's nothing like that. And you can build that, whereas a handoff from the 1/2 yard line, the big quarterback plunge could have been as important, but it just doesn't. You can't build it up quite the same way, but I didn't mind, whatever it was. But yeah, there were some big plays, and the bigger they were, look at the play to end the Iron Bowl, the Gravedigger. You had time to add a few extra adjectives and to build the emotion because of how long Milroe had to wait to allow the receivers to all run downfield. So, yeah, there's something about those long plays that makes it a little bit better.
It's like a pop fly in baseball. Like a strikeout to end the World Series is it's over. It's
Yeah.
over real. It's like the '96 World Series with the Yankees and the Braves.
Yeah.
Pop fly to end the game. You could breathe a little bit, and you can set that
Exactly.
moment up, and you knew it was about to end. So I'm
Exactly.
sure you can appreciate that moment.
I saw that much differently than the two of you did. Actually, as an 11-year-old child, it ruined things for me. But Eli, without getting into like the top four just yet, is there a call that you like hearing played back? I mean, you hear people. I know you listen back to your work, and you would as you were working. But you hear people say, "I don't like the sound of my own voice," that kind of thing. But is there one that, like, not necessarily that fans throw at you, maybe a deeper cut, like where you think, you know what, Eli Gold really nailed that one?
Phew. I don't know. There were a number. I've been blessed to do decent calls when they mattered, but I love the win over Texas, and the roses in this grand old stadium are once again crimson. Where does that come from? That's just it's
a gift.
It's not pre-written. It's not planned. I thought about stuff like that. I think we talked on a previous episode, in the shower that morning. I was just kind of going over in my mind, what might I say? And I wanted to tie it into the successes that Alabama had at the Rose Bowl Stadium years ago, elevating Southern college football, because in those days the power was on the West Coast, and I wanted to tie it all together. So I had the seeds planted, but I hadn't harvested anything. And then all of a sudden the game is over, and that's what I came out with. So I enjoy that one. That was a pretty darn good call.
Do you have an alternative, like a backup plan? Like if it doesn't go Alabama's way, do
No.
the roses become burnt orange at that point?
No, not at all. That's a good thought, but no. In those, if it doesn't go well, I just don't say anything, or I got, some people loved it, some people hated it. The game at College Station a number of years ago, where I basically took a page out of Vin Scully's book, who was spectacular in doing baseball for the Dodgers, and he would say, "You'll know by the crowd's reaction what happened." And you'd listen, and either there'd be a big yell if they were playing at Dodger Stadium, or it'd be a big yell if they were playing at Yankee Stadium, depending on what it was. But so I did that in that game-winning field goal for Texas A&M.
This is 2021 season.
Yeah, and I said, I forget exactly what I said, but we'll let the fans tell you what happened. And after a couple of seconds, I said the snap, just so people knew where we were, the hold, and that was it. And I didn't say anything for a while, which is more TV-ish than it is radio-ish, but I wanted the people to feel that they were there by hearing that crescendo, that volcano erupting of sound. And some thought it was a bad call because of that. Some thought it was very artfully done. Whatever. I'm not here to defend it, but or to castigate it. But it's you do take those liberties sometimes. But there are some big plays. But that one about the Crimson Roses, that one's pretty darn good, and people still can quote it to me verbatim. They really can. So I'm, that one must have caught people's attention.
I think a reader recently, since this podcast started airing, recited that to me in an email.
Really?
The exact word for word. So it worked.
Yes, it did. But, you don't plan that. I mean, how can you plan something? We're sitting there in Atlanta, and you just give up that dreadful sack that Tua took to Georgia. You're not thinking about winning at that point. You're just thinking about, trying to get some of those yards back and what have you. And then all of a sudden the game's over. What do you say? And that was an interesting deal because I didn't have anything. I hadn't thought of anything good in the shower that morning. I really hadn't. There was nothing special about that game in Atlanta. Bama had won there so many times, and I just didn't want to take that route, so I just started ticking off factual things. Saban has done this and this, tied himself with Bear Bryant, and da. So, sometimes the circumstance doesn't call for anything poetic. It just say, hey, Bama won, here's what it meant, and the Tide's back on top of the college football mountain.
Well, let's start building this Mount Rushmore here. Let's start looking at the top 4, what you consider the 4 defining Eli Gold calls. Where would you start? What's the first call that you would pick to put on this?
At the top of Mount Rushmore, it'll be the win over Georgia. When Tua came in, and, I had a good call. We had Phil Savage jumping in the middle of the play, which isn't great radio by any stretch.
Yeah.
I was ready to shoot him, but I love you, Philbert. I really do. But
Does Phil know that though? Like, does he?
Yeah.
Like when you go off mic or something, once y'all are done making the call, does he say, "Eli, I'm sorry, I just couldn't help myself"?
No. That
He didn't get
sentence
that
has never been uttered. But
Okay, so you still resent him a lot.
You hit the eject
not at
button.
all.
Okay. He was out of the dome. He was through the roof.
We're still dear friends, but his mic, however, in future circumstances, I'm serious, has been muted.
Wow.
Tom Stipe will very quietly, pull the mic.
Because he's a repeat offender. Right?
Well, he did that one in LSU.
Yeah, not that we're keeping score.
No,
we're
not that we're keeping score. But we'd still talk all the time. We're dear friends. But yeah, that was probably the number one call, because it was maybe one of the number one plays in the history of Crimson Tide football. The fact that Coach Saban had the guts to bring in a true freshman at halftime and all of this stuff, and then here he comes and he wins the game with a toss to another true freshman. That one was, and because you went from being, if you were a Bama fan, after that sack, you went from being as low as a whale's toilet. I cleaned that up for your benefit, thank you very much. But you went from being as low as that to this unbelievable high in a matter of seconds. So I didn't think of anything other than call it as you see it. But that one was big.
But when it puts you on the spot like that, because nobody knew that was going to happen.
Sure.
I mean, you obviously know that the stakes are as high as can be.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that it's Alabama's greatest play of all time, without question.
It could well be, yeah.
It's a bomb pass for a touchdown. It's a walk-off to win the national championship.
Yep.
It couldn't be bigger. But is it special to you because you have to be on your feet when something like that happens? You got to make a great call like that. You have to do that anyway in your line of work.
Yeah.
But the fact that it ended the game, it ended the championship.
You don't think about it at that moment. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, and I couldn't swear to this, but I'm pretty sure what did happen was when we went to commercial. I asked Tom Stipe, our engineer and producer, I said, can you play that back in my ears so I know what the heck I said? Because I have no idea sometimes what I said, because you're just so zeroed in. It's like you're wearing, blinders on a horse race. I was so zeroed in, and, next thing you know, the game's over. Bang, it's done. And I really didn't remember what I had said. The previous time that happened was, and we've talked about this on another episode, was after the kick six. And, I didn't know what I said. I thought I had done a good call. I didn't know what I said. And the next day on an airplane flying to Las Vegas to work the NASCAR banquet, I woke up somewhere over mid-America, and with Wi-Fi on the airplane, I was able to find the cut. I didn't listen on the way home. We didn't play it on the post-game show, certainly. I just, so I really didn't know exactly what I had said. And then I found the cut as I'm flying out to the West Coast. So sometimes you just don't know what you said. You don't have a computer screen in front of you to look back and see, what did I write 2 sentences ago? Am I repeating myself or whatever? you just got to go with your experience and hope for the best.
Just to be clear, the kick six isn't going to make the Mount Rushmore, right?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't
No.
say
That's
that.
in the whale's toilet episode.
That's right. That's in the whale's toilet. Yes,
I was
very good.
Just making sure.
Yes.
Yeah. But well, let's go to your second pick. Well, what would be second? That was obviously classic.
Second might be Terrence Cody blocking the field goal, his second field goal of the day against Tennessee. When Alabama, as it turns out, won that ball game, and as history now shows, that also probably saved the national championship for Alabama that year, which you didn't know at the time. You knew it saved the ball game, and you knew it was huge, and that was a very, very good call. I had to hesitate. I had to double clutch because I wasn't 1,000% sure who had blocked it. You know, all the hands, all the arms go up, and I didn't know immediately. I even listened to Vern's call, and he was a few seconds behind, and then he said, Cody, I believe, you know, but he was kind of hedging his bet because it was tough to tell, and he was in the booth right next to me. So I was about a beat and a half behind, but that's all right. Get it right, and I did. And, you know, and then I summed it up. Alabama wins. Alabama wins. You don't have to say any more than that. It was the Tennessee game. It was a huge game within the conference. You knew what could be on the line on the national picture. So, yeah, that one is probably number two.
I remember that was the first year I was covering the team. Standing, my thought I was on the field. I got down to the field. A lot of the big games at the end of the game. I'm standing under the goalpost where the kicker is kicking. Mm-hmm. I see the ball is snapped. Everyone's jumping. Never see the ball. No. Just hear the crowd, and it's like, well, I guess we can go to the field now. I guess it's over because you could just never. Just remember the pictures of Julio.
Yeah.
If Terrence Cody didn't block it, Julio was going to get it with his armpit.
Exactly.
Because he was so high above. It was like as high as you've ever seen someone jump.
Exactly.
Vertically.
But no, it's that was a great, and of course it was the Tennessee game, which always carries a little extra importance to the fans of both schools, for that matter. So yeah, that one is maybe number two.
It seems like field goal blocks would be a really exciting thing to call. I mean, you never expect it.
No.
And it happens so rarely. And when it does, that just seems like something you would just feast on.
The other one was the one against Penn State in '89 when Thomas Ram blocked Ray Tarasee's field goal attempt. Yeah, they're huge. They're huge. But they're difficult to call because, you can't tell sometimes who that arm was attached to. And, it's a difficult, thing to pinpoint. And I waited a couple of seconds again. I had the block. It's blocked. And then I looked down there and I saw a bunch of our players, a bunch of the Bama guys, hitting Thomas Ram. Congratulations. They were slapping him on the shoulder pads and hitting him on the helmet. And I said, Thomas Ram with whatever I said. I don't remember the exact wording, but, sometimes you got to look before you speak because I wasn't I knew it was blocked. I just wasn't sure. And in that case, I could hear it. I mean, you could hear the two thuds, the thud of the foot hitting the ball and the thud of the ball hitting the arm. So I knew it had been blocked. It just took me a moment to figure out who done it.
That just puts a lot of pressure on you and other broadcasters because you mentioned the Tua moment and this moment. Again, these are against all odds moments, right, that come out of nowhere seemingly, and everybody's having these out-of-body experiences, including, I'm sure, in some ways, people in the booth. You mentioned, I couldn't even remember what I said, but there's pressure on you to contextualize in real time what is happening for people who are losing their minds.
And, I noticed that, and it's funny because you don't see yourself working, except in recent years, Alabama and many other schools have put a camera in the broadcast booth, and they would show on camera would be the color man, the play-by-play guy, the stat guy, the spotter, whomever, whatever people have in the booth at different schools. And I noticed that on the Gravedigger call. I was, as I had talked on an earlier episode, I was looking both at the field and at the CBS monitor. I was kind of making sure because we were a long way from the play, and but I noticed that when the ball was caught and I'm doing my call, I never moved. I'm just sitting there staring at the field, staring. I was like, I was zeroed in. I never moved. I was just talking and describing. Whereas all around me in the booth, guys were jumping up and down and high-fiving, and Butch and Tom Stiper slapping in the air high fives, and our boss was doing this and this was it. You just shut it out. You just shut it out. And I guess that's just part of my training. I've been doing this a long time.
Pro's pro.
Well, we've got the first half of Eli's Mount Rushmore of his own calls. We're going to take a break here on Beat Everyone. This is the Golden Age with Eli Gold. We'll be right back for the back half of the Mount Rushmore. Stick around. We're back here on Beat Everyone. This is the Golden Age with Eli Gold. I'm Ben Flanagan with Michael Casagrande, and we're doing the Mount Rushmore of Eli Gold calls. We've done two so far. We've had the two to Devontae Smith catch and touchdown to win the national championship. We've had the Terrence Cody block. And so now, number 3, what goes up there?
What do you think it ought to be? Do you have any idea?
You like throwing the curveball.
Throw a little curveball.
I mean, when I think of your calls, I think of the T.J. Yeldon screen pass.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to go back into history some too in terms of the national championships. Your first national championship in 1992. You mentioned that Penn State, but I mean there have been countless. The Kenyon Drake kickoff return. Yeah, there have been so many amazing moments in the Saban era. So, but it's not up to me. This isn't my Mount Rushmore.
And it doesn't have to be in the Saban era. You forget the '92, the '92 national championship against Miami, where Alabama stole the ball going down the left sideline and came, one of the greatest plays that never happened because it was all wiped out because of a penalty. I would have to say that my next big play, boy, it's a good question. The next big one might have to be this. You're gonna think I'm crazy, but the touchdown catch against Auburn at Auburn when Roy Upchurch gave Alabama a huge victory on the Plains. It was an easy call to make. It was an easy play, but it was just such a big play for the Alabama fans. I had a good call on it, and that one doesn't get mentioned all that much, but I think it should. So that might be number 3 or number 4 on the Mount Rushmore list.
I think that's a good point. I mean, because that's a play that it gets over, it glossed over.
Yeah.
Everyone talks about the Terrence Cody, the field goal block, but that was, people forget that drive.
Yep.
Going to that drive, Alabama was on the verge of losing that Iron Bowl.
Exactly.
And I think they still would have made the SEC championship at the Texas championship game. That's out of the picture if they lose that game.
It's all out of the picture. So yeah, that play and the way it played out, and the fact that it was Roy Upchurch, not that he was not deserving of headlines, but he doesn't get as many headlines as some other Bama stars have over the years. That one was, when you look at what it meant, it might not have been the greatest call, although it was pretty good, but it was not a great call in that people remember what you said. But as far as the overall scheme of things, that was a huge, huge play.
What do you remember about that drive, too? Because, I mean, that drive was amazingly engineered. Greg McElroy is obviously bringing them up the field. Julio Jones played an enormous role in converting one first down after another, and it became one of the drives that Alabama fans will remember for the rest of their lives, obviously capped off by the Roy Upchurch touchdown.
That's it. You asked and answered the question right there. The plays were spectacularly done by magnificent athletes. And, we all know what Julio has gone on to do in his NFL career and so on. So it was just an amazing play. And then, to come back and have a somewhat unheralded hero. And I hate to, I'm not denigrating anything that Upchurch did, but, it was like, Petway scoring a basket against Florida for a huge win, whatever it might have been in basketball or whatever the sport. Everybody's looking to Julio, and this, and here comes Roy Upchurch circling out of the backfield and making the play. So that was huge.
It was a drive where I believe Mark Ingram was hurt. He got banged up early in the drive. So the guy who went on to win the Heisman Trophy a few weeks later wasn't a factor in the game. Upchurch was a guy who was probably the third option in the backfield because he had freshman Trent Richardson, obviously a Heisman Trophy winner.
Exactly.
And I was liked Roy Upchurch. I thought he was a good dude. I was talking to him. So it was great to see him have his Roy painting,
Yeah, he was a wonderful guy. So yeah, it's that might be on the Mount Rushmore as much for what it meant as opposed to the call itself. The call was good. It was all right, factual, made the play, and it sounded fine on the air. But the call, the game, the play itself really does not get nearly the headlines it should.
I like that.
Yeah, better than the kick six, right? I mean, everybody thinks so. Let's move on to number 4. This is the final pick on your Mount Rushmore of your own calls. What would be the 4th pick?
Well, that's a good question. If you'd asked me to include all the sports I've ever done, and unfortunately for a bad reason, I would, from an Eli Gold personal standpoint, when Dale Earnhardt lost his life at Daytona, that was my call. I was on the air doing that broadcast for Motor Racing Network, and I had it right. I didn't know the eventual outcome, obviously, but I was right on top of the incident. I described it with all the other guys around, with Sterling Marlin and Kenny Schrader and all these guys around. I had the whole deal laid out, and I thought I called it very well. It's not a favorite because of what happened, but it is certainly very, very memorable.
We'll spend a second on that real quick. And this doesn't have anything to do with Alabama football, but it was obviously a historic moment in sports, shocking for so many, not even for just NASCAR fans. The
and
whole
again,
sports
very
world.
much, Michael was saying it in a humorous way before, but as far as memorable,
yes,
certainly the kick six has got to be in there. It's not on my favorite Mount Rushmore deal because of it was Alabama getting beaten, but as far as memorable calls, I'll remember that game forever and ever, and a day. It's just the way it is.
But just as a quick follow-up to the Earnhardt call, I'm just curious, what do you remember about it? Because you make the call, you got it right, you said, but you don't know the extent of what has happened in his injury. But when you do find that out, what do you remember about that?
Well, I didn't find out about Dale passing away until I was already back at the hotel. It was... it took a while. I got him to the hospital, Halifax Memorial, just up Volusia Highway there from the Speedway. It took a while, and then NASCAR sat on it, made sure everybody had been informed, next of kin, the whole bit. So I was already back at the hotel by the time they disclosed that Dale had passed away. But, you taught in NASCAR broadcasting to call only what you see. That way, you can't get yourself in trouble. Don't speculate. Don't speculate. I've used that in football when guys have, we had a case where a guy went down and swallowed his tongue and was, convulsing on the field. Well, I didn't speculate what had happened, but I just described what was going on. I described the same thing the guy in section 125 could see. I wasn't going to speculate. And that was the same deal that happened with Dale. in his instance. I described clearly what had happened, but then having been around NASCAR for, well, I did 41 years, so it was, a few years less than that when Dale died, but I'd been around a long enough time to know what the procedures were. And I could tell something was wrong. And then when Kenny Schrader got the cool down lap and slowed down and came back around, and he jumped out of the car and ran over to Dale's car and began wildly signaling for the safety crew to come on over, the medical crew, I knew something wasn't right. But we went off the air, saying we'll have updates, throughout the evening, with our news shows, what have you, because nothing had been disclosed at that point.
Well, we got to pick the final Alabama call here, Eli. What's it going to be?
I think it'll probably be, for me, the win over Texas in the Rose Bowl, for a myriad of reasons. It was huge. It was the Rose Bowl stadium. It was not the Rose Bowl game, but it was the Rose Bowl stadium. It did, wrap up history, as we had talked earlier, that, we're back in Pasadena where, Alabama had done well in the early days. You had, I was always partial to the linemen, being a big guy myself. So here's, Marcel Darius doing a full pirouette as though he were Baryshnikov and taking that ball and, on the shovel pass and then doing a pirouette and scoring just before the half, which was even a bigger dagger in the heart of the Longhorns, who had already lost their starting quarterback, Colt McCoy.
I heard about that.
Yeah. So I think
probably a factor.
Yeah, it's probably a factor. So that was probably number 4 on the list. And again, we're trying to come up with plays here, because I know a lot of you folks are saying, well, what about this? What about that play? What about this play? And you're exactly right. I don't know how many plays I called in 36 years. So just to come up with a few, but I know I've left out so many.
Did the national championship in 2009, was it a long 17 years between 92 and 2009? Like, I'm sure that you felt the buzz that season because you've picked a couple of plays already for this list, but you had to have been anticipating it. Like, this could be the night that Alabama really is finally back, the first one since 92.
Sure.
What was that gap like, and what was that anticipation like?
Well, the gap, I loved being there. So, yeah, you want to win all the time, but, still you're walking into Bryant-Denny Stadium as the voice of the Tide. You're walking into, this stadium and that stadium as the voice of clearly one of the biggest franchises in sports history. So, yeah, you wanted to win the title, but I didn't think about that. I was just thrilled to be there. I was just thrilled to be able to be the conduit between the Tide and the fans. So, yeah, I was disappointed at certain times where, things didn't go well. But, there were times where it went pretty darn well. So I didn't think of it like that. But when that championship came, that first one in the Nick Saban era, I realized right then and there, I'd realized before that, but I realized the Tide was back.
Eli, you get a championship ring when they win a championship, don't you?
I've been able to do that. Yes, sir.
Is that typical for broadcasters most of the time, home broadcasters?
Yes, in many cases, yes. In some cases, no. But in many cases, yes.
So you've got quite the collection at this point.
I do. I have a nice collection because we would get the national championship ring. We would get an SEC championship ring if that, came into play. So yeah, I've got myself a nice collection. Many of them are on display at the Alabama Sports Hall of Fame. They're in my display there. and the ones that aren't are in a safe deposit box because I just haven't gotten down to the Hall of Fame to let them add that to the collection on in my permanent display. But yes, it's nice to have them. I have one at home, and in light of the fact that I've lost so much weight, the ring is so big now that I can't wear it because it flies off my hand. But otherwise, they're either on display at the Hall of Fame or in the safe deposit box.
But you and John Sterling from the New York Yankees could probably compare
Well,
rings.
yeah, I don't know how many John had, but I've been, like I said, I know I sound like a broken record, but I've been blessed. I was with the right organization, the right people at the right time, and I wouldn't have had it any other way.
Well, Alabama fans have been blessed with your calls, too. We've got the Mount Rushmore locked in. Now we've got the Tua to Devontae Smith, Georgia walk-off pass. We've got Terrence Cody, the Rocky Block call. Surprisingly, the Roy Upchurch touchdown in the 2009 Iron Bowl, and then the Texas Rose Bowl championship call. You feel good about that?
Yeah, there are people who are saying the Upchurch call doesn't deserve to be in there.
I like it.
And I think because of the importance, this isn't, I know you asked me, but it's not so much just about Eli Gold's call. You can't overlook what the play meant to the team and to the season. And that was as big of a play that year as is any. It just doesn't get on the list of some people because they tend to forget it or was overwhelmed by the other plays, whatever. But I like that one.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eli. We really appreciate you naming your Mount Rushmore here. I agree with so much of what you said. Let's do this again soon.
Yes.
If you have a question for Eli, you can leave us a voicemail at 205-523-4809. Subscribe to Beat Everyone on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And for Michael Casagrande and Eli Gold, I'm Ben Flanagan. Thank you for watching and listening. Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon.